Hi, Dr. Versalotti here. I think that Brown Chapter 9, Assessing Reading, a really good job of going over that there's different genres and the different genres affect reading. The reading of a poem would be assessed differently than the reading of a novel or a short story, perhaps. And there's also assessment of reading at many different levels. Perception for beginning learners, um, all the way through to extensive reading assessment. And the chapter has a lot of examples for designing different assessment tasks. So I think that there's a lot of information there for you to model um, assessments on and to think about things. So I just want to add a little bit to it of some pitfalls that I sometimes fall into, and I want to talk about those. The first one is wordy questions. Now, as instructors, especially for online courses, we want to give a lot of context so to help students understand the task and to be successful. But we have to balance that with the language level of the student and how sometimes too many words can be detrimental for the student. Likewise, we want to think about our use of collocations and phrasal verbs very carefully. Now, sometimes if you're teaching collocations and phrasal verbs, of course, you're probably going to assess collocations and phrasal verbs. But if you're not specifically assessing their knowledge of collocations and phrasal verbs, you might want to avoid them. For instance, I was reading over an assessment for a neuroanatomy course, and I read the case study and read the question, and I chose the answer, and she said, yeah, how did you know? Well, the question's wording, it said suffer a blank. And from the choices, I thought concussion fit, and it was right. So the instructor's use of the collocation let me answer it without any actual neuroanatomy knowledge. So the reverse of that, sometimes we might want to be testing their reading knowledge, but what we're really testing is their knowledge of collocations or phrasal verbs, or their lack thereof. So they might understand the reading, but they might not have the collocation use right. So something to think about. I also want to strongly discourage you from using an obviously incorrect option in multiple choice. If you don't want to offer 4 choices that are plausible, just offer 3 then. I don't think it helps the student to have this out of the blue question. I think it takes them out of the test, and I don't think that it aids instruction, which is the point of assessment, to the beneficial consequences. Let's look at some examples. Said there's lots of examples in Brown, but there's some things that I just wanted to call your attention to. On page 235, there's this example, do you like champagne? Lucy says, no, I can't blanket, and you're supposed to choose the correct one that fits in the blank, and in this case it would be stand. I can't stand it. So what is this question testing? Is this a clean question? I mean, by that, is the test only testing their reading, or something else maybe contaminating it? Pause the recording whenever you want and think about this. Okay, so to me, this is an odd question because first, in the first part of the question, Oscar uses the word champagne, which is a pretty strange word to include, unless for some reason champagne was one of your vocab words previously or in this current unit, which seems unusual. And also, can't stand, I can't stand it is a phrasal verb or at least strongly collocated. So I feel like that would only be testing that collocation. Normally, if you say, hey, do you like pizza? No, I don't like it, right? You would use the do support in there. So the can't stand is contrary to the normal pattern, and that's why I say it's isolated. And if you're testing that, that's okay, but it shouldn't be testing the grammar of how you respond to yes/no questions. Let's look at another example. On page 47, there's a question where you read the passage and it says, what do you think the main idea of this passage is? Think about how many words are here. Think about how many clauses. Are they all needed? How would you maybe reduce them? So there are two clauses here, right? The main clause asking about what the passage means. But then there's also this embedded clause, do you think? Now, in spoken language, we often ask, what do you think about this idea? It's a way that we add politeness, but I think that it is off base here for two reasons. One, it adds an extra clause and extra words that are just more for the student to process, especially ESL students. You're asking them to process an embedded clause, which is harder. And secondly, it gives the idea that you can talk about your own opinion. Oftentimes we say this when we want people to just share their own opinion. And that's not really what you want to assess here. You want them to read the passage and say what the author's point is, not your own. So something to think about there. I think the question would be just fine as, what is the main idea? Or what is the main idea of this passage? Either way is fine. Either way is better than what do you think? Because you really don't want the student's opinion here. Let's move on to the next one. In this one, the students, the test takers read a passage, and one of the sentences during at least 3/4 of the year, the Arctic is frozen. And then the question asks the student to take that concept and convert it into the amount of time that water is available. So take the meaning of that sentence and convert it to choosing which the amount of time the water is available. So if you had to draw that as a picture, what would you draw? Seriously, pause it, take a time to do it so we can think it through. For me, if I were to draw the meaning of 3/4 of the year the Arctic is frozen, I would have a circle. 3/4 of it would be ice, and then maybe 1/4 of it would be blue, or maybe green, because that's the plants could use it then, right? But what the are in the example, only one that seems to be 3/4 is this one. And notice that the only way I solve this is 3/4, 3/4. But look what's happening here. The Arctic is frozen 3/4, but in the picture, it looks like the frozen part is 1/4. So the meaning of the sentence is not actually depicted in this diagram. Now, again, this is just me being hyper aware of thinking about the students and how they think, and what might trip them up, what might be a pitfall. And it might be interesting sometimes to let the students draw for themselves to show what they know, rather than to pick one of the four. And this is an idea that I don't think Brown stressed enough. When you're assessing reading, you might want to, in order to cleanly assess reading, you have to separate reading comprehension from the other skills, like writing. And if you're always testing reading through writing, you're really testing both. So an option to avoid that, you could have them read and then produce some sort of graphic response, like a picture or a diagram. A diagram like we just saw, or the water cycle, or you could even do it for after they read a story, draw a picture of what it looked like at the end, right? So they could hear the story or read the story and then use a different mode to express what they know. Another example here on page 233, it was true and false sentences based on a picture. And one example is the cat is on the table. true or false? Now that seems like a fine question, but what learning objective could this item assess? What's really happening there? Are they assessing the vocabulary? Is it assessing reading? Is it assessing vocabulary? Now, that is an open question in the field, because we need to have vocabulary and we need to understand grammar and syntax in order to understand reading and in order to write. It is an open question in the field if we should assess vocabulary and grammar separate from reading and writing and speaking and listening. So, accepting that that's an argument in the field, let's go back to these true and false sentences. Rather than have true and false, what if you gave two choices? For instance, the cat is on the table and the cat is in the table, and they have to circle the one that matches the picture. This has an advantage over the true and false in that the students have two sentences to compare, two sentences to process, and they can look for the difference of those sentences, right? That very basic discrimination task, in versus on. And once they find a word that is different, they have to know the meaning of that preposition. And so you'll at least have a better idea of what's being assessed with this comparison. And it benefits the student because it gives them the practice of paying attention to the important parts. Now, the second example, the book is on the table versus the table is on the book. You see, again, the content words are the same. So if the students only know the content words, that's not going to help them choose the right answer. True, false, it's a 50-50 chance. Here, you'll have a better idea of the assessment, what's going on, if they're only relying on content words or not. This is going to give you a little more information about how they process the syntax of a sentence. Okay, and this is not connected to the reading chapter, but also the next reading, with the idea that should grammar and vocabulary be assessed within the skills like reading, speaking. The next assignment, assignment 4, is text-based. So you're going to decide how you do any text-based reading, right? Whatever way that you want to do it, thinking about grammar and vocabulary. Okay, and the last part that I wanted to talk about is on page 54, where Brown gives some criteria for assessing a summary and gives 4 criteria. Now, what could we do with this? Well, we could create a rubric, right? We could create a rubric that uses these categories and maybe 3 or 4 levels of the quality, scaling the quality of the answers, logically a little bit mis-sequenced, extremely disorganized, however you would work that out. That's the hard part. But maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we would want to just do points. Main idea and supporting ideas is worth the most. And you might even want to break that down, saying the main idea is worth 4 points and the supporting ideas are each worth 3 or something like that. Or you might want to even be more specific on your answer key. You might want to say something like the student gets 4 points if they have the idea that peanut butter is healthy, that 2 points for each of the supporting ideas, and you would be looking for those words in their summary. I did want to make a quick point about the number 2, that the summary is written in the student's own words, but the vocabulary of the text is acceptable. We do want students to use the appropriate vocabulary, but we don't want them to just copy a whole sentence, which some students try to do that to get the right answer. I thought a good activity for our learning community would be to share a context and a reading assessment from your own experience, making connections from the concepts in the reading. Looking forward to sharing ideas.